Developed by the very young Polish game studio Hyperstrange, who were recently tasked with developing the upcoming Postal Brain Damaged. Elderborn is a first-person hack-and-slash with heavy amounts of Souls-like influence sprinkled in, an aesthetic that looks as if every classic thrash and death metal album art from the 90s was thrown into a blender, and I mean that in a good way. With visuals like these, it's a fucking wet dream for a metalhead like me. And to top it all off, the soundtrack is almost entirely heavy metal, with fat chunky guitars that are perfect to listen to while you're smashing your foes into a fine bloody pulp. You play as a barbarian, either female or male, and after a fight to the death you've been chosen to uncover the mystical secrets of an ancient city known as, Yermum. I've spent almost 30 hours of my life playing this game, and I still can't tell if the developers just had some fun with that name or if the name just whooshed over their head. Anyways, before you can get there you have to venture through the catacombs, and right off the bat the game already starts off pretty strong with the first chapter. The level design here, even though it's pretty linear, it just flows so smoothly, which complements the tutorial really well. The game doesn't straight up tell you everything you need to know, and instead it breaks down the basics into small little sections of the level that let you get a good grasp on some of the controls and features. You've got your dash or dodge, a kick to break through an enemy's defenses, and can also be an insta-kill if used correctly. A file, an item that can heal you but needs to be charged with essence, which are basically just experience points. And fountains, which are your respawn points, as well as a place where you can spend your essence on leveling up your barbarian. Your skill tree isn't very complex, but none of the perks here are useless. Some are very situational, but all of them have their uses. All in all, everything seen here are just your normal staples to every Souls-like, just refurbished to give a new unique identity and to fit into the game's world. Outside of the tutorial, Elderborn becomes a drawn-out typical level of Doom, where you're just going around looking for keys to go to the next area. Don't worry, it's not as bad as I make it sound. I'm not a huge fan of this kind of level formula, because with games that have something like this, it can get to a point where you just need one key, but just in such a convoluted spot that you spend an hour in one level just looking for it, to the point where it becomes nauseating. But with Elderborn's level design, it almost naturally guides you to where you need to go. No quest markers that point you to an exact location, and you'll probably never feel totally lost or feel like you need to backtrack. It's quick, simple, and it leads you straight into the action. Speaking of action, the combat, which is also pretty simple, but very satisfying. It all boils down to learning your enemy's attack patterns and knowing what weapon to use amongst the plethora that you'll later have. You've got your standard one-handed, two-handed weapons, as well as light and heavy weapons, along with weapons that can block and weapons that can parry, and deliver a devastating counterattack if timed correctly. I'm a bit more of a heavy weapons guy. I like swinging around this cartoonishly oversized hammer that takes up almost my entire screen. Seeing all the enemies flop around on the ground as I'm swinging is really entertaining, and those moments where I could see their head fly off in slow motion is mwah, a chef's kiss. Also, after you kill 100 enemies with one weapon, that weapon becomes mastered, which means that it'll either do more damage or sometimes it'll be given a special passive. This is a pretty good way to incentivize playing with multiple different weapons rather than sticking to one. You might have also noticed that the enemies have these weird glowy bits all over their body, and as goofy as it looks, it's actually a visual indicator of how damaged they are. The less glowy bits they have, the more damaged they are. For some enemies it's not nearly as obvious, but all of them do have a part of their body that glows and gets darker the more you attack it. And while I don't have a problem with a health bar just floating above them, I do like it when games have something like this. It makes character designs really unique, and it doesn't clutter the screen. Finally, there's the boss of the first chapter, Janus. He's actually pretty tough at first. There's a lot you need to pay attention to, like his attack pattern, and knowing when it's a good time to go in for a hit. And if you're really ballsy, you could try parrying his attacks. But I doubt most would be capable of doing this on their first playthrough. I'd recommend only using the spear. It's fast and it allows you to keep your distance away from him. I've tried using the sword and hammer, but it's really hard to time your attacks with them, even when you're just doing light attacks. And if you somehow manage to get through his first phase, you definitely won't get past his second, which I think is the hardest one of the three. His attack pattern changes and he does this weird spin move which deals a fuck ton of damage, and can be tricky to avoid if you're up in his grill trying to deal the most amount of damage. Then there's his third phase, which surprisingly I think it's his easiest. It might look a little intimidating because the pace of the whole fight ramps up, and he's jumping all over the place, but there's a huge window of time for you to go in and start jamming him a bunch after his attacks. After you defeat him, you're rewarded with his sword, and you're able to finally go into the city of your mom. And I quickly realized that this place is a shithole. It's just about as bad as Detroit. In fact, it's about as bad as the entire state of Michigan. You've got fuckers that smell bad, these weird disappearing ninja dudes that can sometimes throw fireballs at you. They can go fuck themselves, honestly. And these decked out golden knights who could also go fuck themselves. I'm not exactly sure what happened to the level design here, but the second chapter of this game is so much weaker compared to the first. Sure, you've got the entirety of your mom to explore, but the thing is, she's not very interesting. I like the first chapter because even though, like I said, it was linear, there was a constant change in the environment that always kept me interested. The moment I started to feel a little bored of one area, the game would switch, and the next thing I know, I'm in some Egyptian-styled catacombs, or on a giant bridge that's suspended by enormous chains. But you don't really get that in your mom. Instead, you're just stuck in a really depressing city where the only thing that's even remotely interesting are these huge towers. But you'll grow to hate them because they're the main objective and they're a pretty bad one at that. You see, the only thing you'll be doing in your mom is going around and collecting keys so you can go into these huge towers and fight a horde of enemies. While some dickhead constantly shoots lasers at you. You've got to do this 3 fucking times. It's not fun, it's repetitive, and it can be really aggravating when you've got a fuck ton of enemies just dogpiling you at the same time. Which is what the third tower is all about. Oh boy, I ain't lying when I say I think shoving a fork into an outlet is a more preferable option to doing this shit. And that feeling of realizing you don't have enough keys to progress to the next area is awful. Didn't think I'd have to deal with this judging by how the first chapter was so easy to navigate through, but here I am looking for a key to get through a gate. However, I've got one solution for this one particular area. There you have it, guys. That was my speedrunning trick. Please like, subscribe, and donate to my Patreon so I could continue fueling my crippling addiction to porn. Combat was also pretty solid up until this point. The game already introduced you to a ranged enemy, and I don't think there's much of a nuisance as a guy who could constantly shower you with pellets and a guy who constantly shower you with fireballs. Yeah, the game's combat isn't as great when you've got multiple ranged enemies to deal with. See, the javelin throwers work because they don't throw as often, and when they do, you're given enough time to react. But with the walking artilleries, when they're constantly shooting at you, it becomes a little bullshit. All you really can do is just dodge. You can't really parry because you can only parry one projectile at a time. And the fire starters, even though they don't have rapid fire, their projectiles arch, making them harder to parry. These guys also fucking suck when you're dealing with a bunch of other enemies. Also, what's up with these guys and having an attack that deals so much knockback? They already have the upper hand with projectiles, that they really need anything else? Anyways, after you're done with the 3 towers, you can move on and fight the boss. Discount Ornstein and Smo. Apart from the very original character design, I'm actually not gonna lie, this boss fight slaps. Much like Janus, you have to pay attention to the attack patterns of both Inane and Amazeric. It should also be your first priority to take out Inane. I'd strongly advise killing Tons of Fun first. Sure, he's a big lumbering dumbass and he might as well have a bullseye painted on his left ass cheek, but killing him first means you have to deal with Inane throughout the rest of the fight. And she's quick, small, and she can also go invisible, and the next thing you know, you're doing the horizontal hokey pokey with her. You should also definitely continue using the spear. If you've managed to find the guitars, you can use them too, just keep in mind you're gonna have to go up close and personal to get some good hits. My god, I haven't even mentioned the song that plays while you fight. Christ, it's so fucking good, just give it a listen. That song alone made the $4 I spent on the OST worth it. Sadly, Amazeric and Inane are the last bosses of the game. The last chapter is you just going through a bunch of stages killing enemies until you reach the end. Or it's just a straight path with a bunch of enemies and you're given the power mace. A weapon that can kill anything in one hit. I know the ending doesn't sound all that exciting, but the part with the power mace always gets me. It just feels so badass, and hearing that distant voice muttering some gibberish at me is cool, but the ending just feels really empty to me. It's not a feeling of, wow, that was one hell of a game, it's more like, well, that was fun, what's next? It's mostly because the game is really short. Playing it for the first time, it might take a couple of hours to finish it, but after that, everything just kind of becomes a routine. I mean, I've lost count on how many times I've played this game, but I've gotten to a point where I just breezed through the entire thing, beating it in no more than 3 hours. Which is a bit of a shame, because even with how ugly your mom looked, I was still pretty invested in this made-up heavy metal world, and I would have loved to see more of it. A story expansion or even a sequel has to happen, and I'd buy the shit out of it if it becomes a reality. But for now, after you beat the game, you're given the option to do New Game Plus. You start the game all over again, but you're given all the weapons, skills, and levels you ended the game with. There's also a new enemy variant, the Essence Conduits. They drop more essence after you kill them, but they can one-tap you. I'm not exactly a fan of this. I get that's a part of Souls-likes to be really unforgiving, but dying to a bitch slap just seems wrong to me. I feel like every time I die, I should realize where I fucked up and try to improve from that. But I can't exactly do that when I've lost an entire no-death run to an enemy that instantly kills you. Like, I guess I could have blocked or dodged or something, but sometimes I can't really do that when I'm surrounded by 30 other enemies. Apart from that, New Game Plus is actually pretty enjoyable. Typically, I don't really like New Game Pluses, but something about the way Elderborn does it makes it really addicting to just keep playing through them. I like being able to continue building up my character to be an absolute powerhouse. It's also a good way to get better at playing, since this would be a good time to start mastering other weapons you haven't used before, or even doing some of the challenges, which I haven't even mentioned yet. They're almost exactly like mastery challenges, except it's more to do with stuff like parrying or utilizing your other abilities. Doing them rewards you with a shit ton of essence. Going into Elderborn for the first time, I was honestly surprised just how much replay value this game has. Most NDs like this tend to skip out on the endgame, but that's not the case with Elderborn. I'd say New Game Plus is better than the rest of the game. There's just something about being all leveled up and using late game weapons to bash through starter enemies that just makes this part of the game so satisfying and fun. But now it's time for the age-old question. Is Elderborn worth it? I think it is. Maybe it's just a tad bit overpriced, I don't know. I got this game when it was on sale and I haven't felt like any of my money was wasted. And if you get a kick out of games like these, I feel like you'd be on the same boat as me. Despite everything bad I've said about the second half of the game, I have to say Elderborn is probably my second favorite indie game. Puzzle 2 being the first, of course. It's just how well all the strong aspects of the game are bundled together. Like the visceral combat, the interesting level environments, the level design, and that fantastic fucking soundtrack. It makes the second chapter feel like just a small spaghetti stain, and the entire game feel like one hell of a power fantasy to play through. And I mean, Elderborn did also spark my interest in wanting to try out other Souls-likes. I've been wanting to try out Dark Souls ever since I finished this game for the first time. But god damn, it's $60 fucking. Do you have any idea how much porn I could buy with that much money? It's at least like 3 videos that are under 20 minutes. If you want to feel like a complete badass for 3 hours, plus maybe a few more if you've got some fuel in the tank for New Game Plus, and you also want to try out a Souls-like for the first time, I'd highly recommend checking out Elderborn. Whether you should buy it on a sale or not is kind of up to you. Elderborn, I'd say, is probably the most casual, easily digestible, condensed introduction to the basics of most Souls-likes that $15 can buy. 10 out of 10. It's like Skyrim, Dark Souls, and Doom got drinking a metal concert and had a threesome in a public bathroom, and then Elderborn came out.